Hi friends, well welcome back for session 3 of our 3-part video series about forgiveness that I'm taking from Genesis 33, 1 through 11. And if you haven't seen the first 2 videos, I encourage you to go back and do that first, because I won't be reading the passage today and I want you to be familiar with it. So check that out first and then come back and join us. Well, we've been looking at this reconciliation between Esau and Jacob. And one of the reasons we've been looking at it is because we're wanting a glimpse of something that Joseph observed. You remember I wrote a Bible study back in the spring. I finished a study called Joseph, Keeping a Soft Heart in a Hard Place. And that study is now available on this website and on Amazon.com. But in that study, I walk with Joseph from Genesis 37 through 50. That's really Joseph's story. And yet, the other day in my quiet time, I discovered this passage here in Genesis 33. And I know I've read it before, but I'd really never noticed that God takes the time to point out to us that Joseph was present and probably very observant to what was going on. This man, this young boy probably at the time, one day would have to forgive not one brother, but 10 brothers for heinous, unexcusable treatment. So he was able to watch his uncle Esau offer that same kind of gracious, loving forgiveness to his father Jacob. And so I want to see what Joseph saw. And I hate it that we didn't get to include this in the Bible study, but I'm so glad that you've joined me for this video and we get to look at it now. The first thing I saw, in this passage was that forgiveness is something that you have to work out with God before you can walk it out with another person. And then in the last video, we looked at how often our wounds are a result of feeling a loss and a lacking. We feel like we are a loser. And yet both Jacob and Esau point out that they have plenty. These men, especially Esau, has experienced a healing because he is not focused on what he lost, but he focused on God's graciousness and how God is enough, and everything that God has provided is enough. And so we discovered that when we also focus on God's graciousness and we are grateful for what we have in Him, instead of focusing on our loss, then we will also experience healing in our wounded hearts. And we'll be able to offer the same kind of just amazing, lavish grace that Esau gave to Jacob. Today, I want us to understand something else, a huge, just a fringe benefit that occurs when we offer forgiveness and grace. I love in verse 10 of our passage, this is when Esau and Jacob are having this conversation about whether or not Esau will accept the gifts that Jacob has brought him. Verse 9, I'll back up to there, but Esau says, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own." But Jacob says in verse 10, "No, please. If now I have found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand. For I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably today." I read another translation, I believe it was the Message or the New Living Translation, that said something along the lines of, "Because you have been gracious to me, when I look at your face, I see the face of God." You see, you've probably heard it said that we're never more like Jesus than when we serve or than when we love. But I also have to contend that maybe it's the truest that we are never more like Jesus than when we are gracious, when we are forgiving. Because Jesus came to earth to die for our sins. He did serve and he did love, but ultimately he forgave. He died for our sins so that we would not have to pay the penalty. And when we cancel someone's debt to us and we show them grace, then indeed we show them the face of God. You see, as believers, our purpose in life can be wrapped up in one sentence, and that is that we are to bring God glory. We're to glorify Him. And yet, quite honestly, I find that often believers get kind of stumped up on that word, that real churchy kind of word, glorify. What in the world does it mean to glorify God? Does it mean to sing Him praises? Does it mean to raise our hands in worship? Does it mean to just speak well of Him? Well, those things might be included. But honestly, that word glorify, it means to give a correct picture of, to give it an accurate estimation of. So, when we present God's character, when we act like Him, when we behave like Him, when we treat other people the way He treats people, when we speak His words, when we carry out His attitude and His purposes, then we glorify God because we give those around us a picture of God, of His character, of His face. So Jacob says here of Esau, looking at you is like looking at God right now. That's how gracious you are treating me. Quite honestly, the only one who can forgive like that, the only one who can show that kind of mercy and who can give that kind of grace is God. And so ladies, the only way that you're going to be able to give grace, to give forgiveness, to truly love someone to that extent is to have experienced those very same things from God. When we've experienced fully God's grace, His forgiveness, His love, His approval, His favor, then we are able to give it to other people. And it's not even that because Jesus did, you should. It's because Jesus did, you can. Because Jesus forgave, you can forgive. You now have the ability within you to forgive someone who's offended you. And when you do, you show people around you. You show the offender, but you show others too, the glory of God. Don't forget, our guy Joseph was right there. Maybe he was still bowed to the ground, maybe he was standing up, but he was witnessing this beautiful display of grace and mercy. And one day, Joseph would also need to give that same kind of lavish grace. And guess what? I think it's largely because he saw it lived out before him that he was able to do that. Well, I hope these few little teachings from Genesis 33, 1 through 11 have been beneficial to you and helpful to you. But if you're still struggling with forgiveness, if your heart has become hardened because it's been wounded, maybe because someone took something from you or left you without, I want you to know I understand, I get it. More importantly, God does, and there is healing for your heart. I encourage you to do the work of forgiveness with God. Walk it out, work it out with Him so that you can walk it out with another person. I encourage you to focus on the fact that you have plenty in God. He is enough. No matter what someone may have taken from you, you have plenty to be thankful for, to be grateful for. And I encourage you to continue to seek the ability to forgive, soften your heart, because when you do that, sister, the person who is looking you in the eyes is going to see Jesus. And that's what it's all about. God bless you, and thank you so much for joining me. Hey, maybe I'll be around again sometime soon.